about the role of recovery in resilience building. Okay, so imagine there's a boxing match. So there are two players, each in their respective corners. Okay, so the bell rings and they start fighting. Okay, now the bell rings after a minute or so, they are disengaged and they go back to their respective corners where they take a breath, drink water, or the helpers, wipe the sweat off from their faces. What happens here is the process of recovery is engaged. Okay, so there's a fight for 1 minute, bell rings, they are separated. Okay, so they take a short break and now they're going to fight again, the second round. That break is critical. Okay, this is where magic happens. This is where all the resources are renewed for action. This is a very biological process, and we will be talking about it as to how this break replenish our energies and make us stronger for the next fight. So what is a recovery? Recovery, in essence, is the active process of restoring the physiological and psychological resources which were depleted during the stress response. Okay, so we do that by taking rest or taking breaks or engaging in activities that we are interested in. Basically, the idea is to get away from the source of stress, okay, and rebuild those resources that were engaged in that stress response. We discussed earlier how the stress response is activated by the body to meet a challenge. Okay, this is good for us. That stress response is good for us because this enables us to meet challenges and adversities in the environment. But the continuous stress response or the chronic stress response has negative consequences for our body and our psychology as well. So, for instance, stress or the chronic stress is known to damage the memory circuits in our brain. Okay, it also negatively impacts the emotional center, the amygdala in our brain. So that's where we have problems regulating our emotions, or the anxieties that we get or the depression that we get. It's because of the damage to those regions in the brain. Okay, worse, it can lead to chronic stress can lead to diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, and the list is long. Okay, what we need to understand is the distinction between positive stress and negative stress, right? So positive stress is good for us. It enables us to achieve our goals, to meet our challenges, to meet our adversities, right? It's the negative stress or the chronic stress that we need to be concerned with. Okay, so we want to engage with life and we want to engage with positive stress, but we don't want to dip into the negative territory or chronic stress. So we do this by deploying all these tactics that we've been talking about so far. And recovery is one of the main tactics that we deploy in order to make sure that we recover from this short-term stress. Okay, so as we recover from the short-term stress, now we are ready for the battle ahead. So recovery or taking breaks kind of shorten the span of that stress response and prevents it from getting into that chronic stress territory. This is something we need to understand. Now, in order to understand the recovery process, it is important that we understand the machinery of the stress response. So stress response activate two systems. Okay, one is the autonomic nervous system, and the other one is HPA axis. Okay, the autonomic nervous system is composed of two subsystems. One is the sympathetic nervous system, and the other one is parasympathetic nervous system. We will talk about the parasympathetic nervous system later on in the lesson, but we'll stick to the sympathetic nervous system and the HPA axis for now. The signals from the amygdala activate the sympathetic nervous system and the HPA axis. Okay. Now we will look a little deep into the workings of the sympathetic nervous system and the HPA axis. So the sympathetic nervous system is also termed as the fast pathway. Okay, it's because of its immediate response to a perception of threat, and this is an evolutionary requirement. Okay, that we respond to certain threats immediately, and this is what the sympathetic nervous system does for us. So the sympathetic nervous system stimulates the adrenal glands, okay, which leads to the release of adrenaline or epinephrine and noradrenaline or norepinephrine into the bloodstream. Now, these hormones trigger a host of immediate physiological changes, characteristics of the flight or fight response. Okay, so your heart rate accelerates, your breathing becomes more rapid and shallow, pupils dilate to enhance vision, blood is shunted away from the digestive organs and towards major muscle groups, and energy stores are mobilized. Now, these changes prime the body for immediate physical exertion. Okay. Now, simultaneously, the other system, which is called the HPA axis, is also engaged. Okay. So this is the slow pathway of the stress response, which provides a more sustained reaction. The neuroendocrine cascade begins in the hypothalamus, a small but crucial brain region that links the nervous system to the endocrine system. So the hypothalamus releases CRH. CRH travels a short distance to the pituitary gland, often called the master gland, signaling it to secrete ACTH into the bloodstream. ACTH then circulates throughout the body and reaches the adrenal cortex, the outer layer of the adrenal gland, prompting it to release glucocorticoid hormones, the most significant of which is cortisol. Now, this two-pronged strategy is a very smart design. Okay, so we have the fast response of the autonomic nervous system, and then we have the sustained HPA axis response to deal with the stressor if it persists for some time. However, we need to understand something. The HPA axis has a built-in mechanism, a turn-off switch. Okay, and the way it works is that when cortisol rises in the system, signals are sent to the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland to slow down the production of the hormones needed for the action. Okay, and this pretty much shuts off the stress response. Okay, but there's a problem. If stress is chronic, if it persists for too long, this means that the whole mechanism breaks down. Okay, the whole signaling system breaks down, and this is not good for the body. Now, a critical part of the stress response is the parasympathetic nervous system response. Okay, because this system shuts off the sympathetic nervous system and repairs it. This is crucial for us to understand. So it is critical that we have this off switch engaged. Okay, and a parasympathetic nervous system is activated basically when the body perceives that the threat is gone. Okay, so all of the systems that were engaged earlier are now turned off. Okay, and all the systems that were turned off during the sympathetic nervous system are now back to normal. Some of the signs that now the parasympathetic system is engaged are in the physiological responses. Okay, so you should look out for those signs. Okay, they are. So as you can see from the picture, that the sympathetic nervous system earlier engaged the pupil dilation, the increased heartbeat, the airways dilation, the sweat glands stimulation, the liver stimulation to increase glucose, and the decrease in the activity of the digestive system, and the stimulation of the adrenal glands to produce adrenaline, and the uterus and the vaginal contraction, and the urinary system relaxation. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system does the opposite. Pupils are constricted back, heartbeat slows down, airways are constricted back, blood vessels are constricted back, liver stimulate bile release needed for digestion, and digestion system activity and the intestinal activity resumes. Okay, uterus is relaxed, and the urinary system increase the urinary output. An important player in this off switch is the vagus nerve. Okay, the vagus nerve starts from the brain and goes all the way down. Okay, so it serves as a bidirectional information highway. Okay, it sends signals from the brain downwards, and it can also send signals from downwards all the way up to the brain. So it plays a big role in calming down the stress response. Okay, when the vagus nerve is activated, it sends the signal to the brain, which turns on the parasympathetic system response. Okay, and there are many ways of activating of the vagus nerve response, but the most powerful one is deep, slow breathing and relaxing your muscles. Okay, this sends the signals upward to the brain that the threat is over. You know, what happens when we are in a threatful situation, right? And then when that threat is over, what happens? We take a deep breath, right? And it's over, and we, relax our muscles. So if we engage in this behavior, we can initiate the end of the stress response. Okay. Now, I will be talking about a few more tactics to slow down the stress response, or to shut down the stress response now. When it comes to recovery, sleep is the king. Okay, sleep does a lot of positive things in our bodies. Okay, particularly it enhances our emotional regulation. Okay, and this is done through the enhancement of a prefrontal cortex and the downregulation or the control of amygdala. Okay, so what happens is that when we have a good night's sleep, our prefrontal cortex is stronger. It's more efficient now. Okay, and our amygdala is also in control. It's not too sensitive now to threats. Okay, so now the powerful prefrontal cortex has more control over the amygdala, and through that we have better emotional control or emotional regulation. This is what we need to manage stress. When we have better capacity to control our stress, that means the stress response does not linger on and on and on and on and on. Okay? Remember, the opposite happens when we don't sleep well. The amygdala become oversensitive and the prefrontal cortex become weaker. So the next morning, we have little control over our emotions, and the stress response is difficult to manage. Don't trust me? Find out yourself. Sleep well one night and observe your behavior the next day. Disrupt your sleep, find out the next day. It's black and white, right in front of you. Another important player in recovery is mindfulness and meditation. Okay, so basically what happens is that the more we engage in mindfulness and meditation, the more we facilitate the strengthening of certain areas in the brain which are engaged in emotional regulation. Hippocampus is one of those regions. Okay, so when we engage in mindfulness and meditation, it increases the gray matter density of the hippocampus, okay, which is involved in emotional regulation and stress response. Okay, it also reduces the gray matter volume in amygdala. Okay, thus the stress response or the overactive stress response is weakened. Okay, this is how powerful meditation and mindfulness is in facilitating recovery and improving our stress response. Apart from sleep and meditation, there are other powerful tactics that we can deploy in order to enhance our recovery. Okay, let's suppose we work 9 to 5. Every hour we can take 5 minutes off or 6 minutes off, okay, and just move away from our desk. So that is basically shutting off the sympathetic nervous system and repairing it. Okay. Every week for a day or two, we can just forget about whatever we were doing for the last 4, 5, or 6 days. Okay, and we just engage in something completely different. Particularly, engaging in hobbies is one of the best ways to recover. Okay, because what happens is that when we are involved in a hobby, we lose sense of the world around us. We are so immersed in it. This is such a beautiful state of flow, which is gold for recovery. Okay. Now, recovery in essence does not mean that we should be laying around doing nothing. It's an active process. It can be an active process. Okay, so engaging in hobbies is very, very important. Positive thinking is very important for recovery as well. Okay, wandering is also important as long as it's not negative. Okay, if we just let the imagination loose. Okay, just think about things as long as they are not worries, they're just thoughts, ideas. Okay, that also is helpful for recovery. Okay, so the idea is that we allow the system to shut down. So going back to the boxing story, 2 players in each corner. Okay, the bell rings. They start fighting. This is the sympathetic nervous system, which is engaged. Okay, the bell rings and they are separated. Now they are taking a break from the fight. This is where the parasympathetic nervous system is engaged and it's going to repair the sympathetic nervous system. Why? Because there's going to be another round. Okay, this is how it goes. You engage, you disengage. You engage, you disengage.